It is 1983. You are in your 80s. You're almost 90 years old, and you have achieved the status of being a great grandparent. In addition to being a great grandparent, you have raised nearly all of your grandchildren. Not because their parents had died or did not have the ability to raise them, but that's just the system that was set up in the family was that the grandparents raised the children. And there may be some of you who have that same situation where grandparents raised great grandchildren, lived in the same household with them. Well, this is exactly the case with this lady here. Of course, I always have props. My great grandmother. This is Teresa Holmes Sewell. She has been my brick wall. My gosh, probably the entire time I've been doing research. Many of you think that those of us who work here at Ancestry, especially those of us who are deeply, deeply embedded in genealogy, have every single one of our brick walls figured out, that our trees go all the way back to the beginning of time in the Dark Ages, sourced to the gods, with records galore and all of that. Well, here is where I let you down and tell you that that is not the case. Okay, yes, thank you. If only. No. Everyone that I know in genealogy has a brick wall. And it may not necessarily be a direct ancestor. It could be an aunt, it could be an uncle, it could be a cousin. But for many of us, our brick walls are direct ancestors. And what I'm telling you by showing you this picture of my great grandmother is that she has been my brick wall for a number of years. And it's not because I didn't take the proper steps in terms of genealogy, which is starting with yourself and what you know. So I start with what I knew and what I knew about my father and about his dad and my great great grandparents, right? And then I engaged my living family members, right? I just mentioned that my great grandmother and my great grandfather, who you'll see a picture, this is the same woman with him. You'll see those two in a second. They raised my dad, they raised my aunt, they raised my father's three first cousins. So these were people that my dad and his sister knew intimately, okay, in the same household. And not only them, but my dad's first cousins. So when I went about trying to trace her family history, I made calls to those first cousins. And they gave me great information about him. I had a lot of information about him. And let's talk about that for a second, because sometimes, based on culture and based on records, we tend to not favor or give light to women in the ways that we should. And this is a great kind of bridge to the next session we're going to have in this space, which is about Women's History Month. And sometimes women are anonymous before historical records. They may be referred to as Mrs. James B. Sewell, which is what she could have been referred to instead of Teresa Holmes Sewell. And even despite my dad living with her, okay, even despite my father's first cousins living with her, no one knew anything about her family. Nothing. There was a story that her sister came to visit and they got to fight. And she never came back. And no one remembered the name of the sister. Now, there's some folks in the chat that are talking about her hat. Well, there's family history in this picture. Her daughter, my Aunt Nora, who is right here, made this hat. She was a milliner. She was an artist. So you've got my great grandmother and you've got a hat that her daughter made in this picture. So, of course, I didn't call her Teresa, and neither did my father, and neither did his first cousins. They called her Nanny. So you will hear me refer to her as Nanny for the rest of the session, and don't say I didn't tell you. But we didn't know anything about her. Absolutely nothing. The sister came, they got to fighting, she left, nobody remembered her name. That was literally the only story I had. So that meant that I needed to go to records, right? That meant I needed to, I went through the process. What did I know? What do my family members know? What do we have on hand in terms of records? And then if we didn't have very much on her side, we had a little bit on his side. Then it was a matter of going to search and build my tree out based off of what the historical records were telling me. And of course, I was very intentional about how I included pictures. So that's Aunt Nora, that's my dad and his sister, my Aunt Gail. in Chicago as children with the little beach cruiser. And it's interesting looking at this picture of my dad. My son looks just like him at this age. I might need to do a double take photo of this one. All right. So, what we know, she dies in Chicago, 1983. We know that her and Honey get married in New Orleans. That's it. Yes, good name, right. And Gail was a nickname. Her name was actually Gayla, like a gala affair. Do not ask me where my grandparents got that from. I do not know. I cannot ask them. They die. My dad was not Jack. He was Jackie. They gave them very distinctive names. And I don't know. I haven't quite done the timeline, but it was allegedly because of Jackie Robinson. That's what I heard, but we'll see. All right. So we've got Nanny, her and Honey. They lived in Chicago, died in Chicago. They got married in New Orleans. Now, I can make an assumption that Nanny was born in New Orleans, but that's not really a good idea because I found out that Honey was actually born in Vidalia, Louisiana, which is in Concordia Parish, which is north of New Orleans. So I could make an assumption that Nanny was also from New Orleans. New Orleans is a very transient city in terms of people in the deep South, right? In particular, people who are within Louisiana or within southern Mississippi will migrate there too because it's a larger city. And so there are a lot of transplants, but there are also people whose families have been rooted there for a number of years, like especially folks who are from the Seventh Ward or from the Treme. But my family never lived in the Seventh Ward like that. They were uptown, they were in other spots. So I could make an assumption that she was born in New Orleans. So that's what our stage is for today. No names of great great grandparents, don't have a birth location. All we know is that she blew into New Orleans by the time we get to when she marries Honey. They have their children there, and then by 1930, they are in Chicago, and that is where they die. And that's where we start. Now, those of you who are watching live or even watching the recording, do you have something similar in your family that's like this? Where you know someone existed? Well, all the proof. I mean, essentially, you are here today, so they lived. But when you start asking questions in your family, or when you really start to try to search out information, you keep hitting walls. And there is no magic thing that is coming up from the sky. Now, here's the thing, you all. I have such a big surprise for you today. Oh, this is going to be so good. And every time I'm with you all seem to think that I have a magic wand that I can wave and it just happens. And sometimes I feel like it's like that. But honestly, it's them. And it's the fact that I've kept her picture up on my wall for a solid 5 years, hoping that one day she would rain down the genealogical fairy dust for me and produce. So let's set the stage. What exactly do we have? And when you're going on Ancestry, again, you're going to build your tree out. Okay. This is important. And one of the things that I'm going to show you and that I'm also going to call attention to today is the breadcrumbs we leave on historical records. Oftentimes we think, well, you know what, if more stuff was just digitized, I could find more. Or, you know, if that was just more available, I could find more. You listen, if you've ever heard me speak live, I often talk about how, you know what, it's not so much that we need more records, it's that we need to use the stuff that we already have better. And what's the best piece of advice I can give folks? Go back through what you already have because you probably have left something on the table. This is going to be a prime example of that. Some great comments. Sometimes when you ask living family members about your ancestors, they say, you don't need to know. This information goes to the grave. That's exactly what I think happened in this situation. Yes, yes, right. Brick wall with grandmother, no birth certificate from Memphis, we think, right? And that's possible. Even in major metropolitan areas, sometimes people didn't file their births, which is what they were supposed to do. Oh, great comment. I looked for family for 10 years. They ended up moving from Missouri to Ohio for a time looking for work. See? What if you have hardly any family? Now I have no past family members. No, you still come from people. The thing is, you're going to use what you know, even if it's a little bit, in order for you to get back as far as you can using your searches. And you got to remember a few things. Birth dates in particular, probably I would say for people born before 1950, and that sounds crazy, but hear me out. They could be very malleable. They could be a range. So don't hold yourself squarely to one date. a person could have believed their birth date was one date when they filled out their application for a social security card, but then when they died, it was something else. Generally, when people enter federal systems, being social security or even things like the veteran system, like they become a veteran or a part of the US military, their birth date begins to be standardized. But before that, a lot of times it could be a range. Um, Great comments, you all. Four of my great grandfather's sisters can't find any death records for them. Brick wall for family member in my tree is the ancestors of a black man who passed as white. Right. We end up with racial designations changing. Third great grandfather should be simple as he's a Cushing and own his own ship, which was burned in New Orleans. He should have, right. We should be able to find this guy. What if the brick wall is from when they were enslaved? You aren't ready for this story. Let me go ahead and let me share my screen so that if anything happens today, you are inspired. All right, peeps, here we are. Let's set the stage. This is based on what I already know. If your family ended up in a major metro area, right? Most of my tree is not in a major metro area, but this particular branch of my tree, my Sewell line, where I get my maiden name from, is based in a major metro area for a significant amount of time. And major metro mean major city, right? Where births and birth certificates in particular, obviously marriage certificates, death certificates are freely available. You know, it's different when you're out in the other 63 parishes in Louisiana. Adherence to birth records or creation of birth records may not necessarily be the case, right? Like it's possible that a birth wasn't registered. It's much more likely there than in, than in the parishes. So I've carved out what I know about my great grandfather. And generally speaking, for women, you have to sometimes research the men in their lives in order to find them. So one of the things that I did once I got context on where my great grandparents were is I went through and I sourced information about where they were living. And some of this is on the census. And it's one of those things that we leave behind, street addresses. Now, the way that the records are saved on Ancestry, you'll get information like the age, marital status, relation to the head of household, and even an occupation if it's there. But the actual street address does not come through in that description field. So one of the things that I did was starting in 1900, and yes, look at this record from 1906. That is not a typo. Yes, my great grandfather was arrested. There are very, very incredible records in New Orleans for arrests. In fact, if you have family that lived there, in particular if they were African American, that was a place where unfortunately there was a lot of over policing, and especially if your ancestors were enslaved there. To quote a professor from LSU that has a book, I believe John Bardis is his name, Professor John Bardis. He theorizes that the arrest records in New Orleans before 1865 were essentially a census of enslaved people because of how much the enslaved were policed and arrested there. So keep that in mind as you come across those records. But the thing that I want to point out is I've gone through these records and I've extracted out the street address. Aha. And in 1910, my great grandparents are living at 216 Dryde Street. That's where they're living. Okay. And I've gone and pulled records from Ancestry as well as on site in New Orleans at the state archives, right? Yes. Great comment. Someone says sometimes prison records have photos. Yes, they do. Sometimes they do. Even in New Orleans, the Bertillon cards, those are the cards where the fingerprints were taken and they have the mugshots. You can also find those as well. So I went and found birth records for my grandfather and his siblings. I even included, and I typed out in the description, the street address that my great grandparents were living at. Just because I wanted to also see, it looks like they were moving around a lot. And I've got city directories. So let's click this one where the residence is. We're going to scroll up for a little bit. And typically when we look at city directories, we oftentimes will pay attention to an address because that will let us know that it's the correct person. Also with city directories, depending on the location, it will tell you if the person is Black or African American. They will include a mark after their name, like a copyright symbol. to tell you that the person is Black or colored. There's a question. Where are the New Orleans arrest records found, online or in New Orleans? The New Orleans arrest records are on Ancestry. There are two different collections. I'll just click for one. And they're labeled New Orleans, Louisiana, USA, or US Police Department arrest books. And I will put this link in the chat. And you'll also see the related collections because there's a couple of these. They're labeled a couple of different ways. They go to 1931. Then there's early ones that are predate that from 1805 to 1865. All right. So if we go back to our city directory, here's my great grandfather, honey, James Benjamin Sewell. He's a machinist living at the rear of 2113 Willow. So we've got lots of different addresses. Here's 2611 Willow Court, 2113 Willow. So that's not too far away. Ironworker at 2914 3rd. And then when we get to 1920, they have the same exact address for a number of years until they get to Chicago. Are there prison records for South Carolina? I believe so, but I'm not quite sure. You make sure you go through our card catalog and search to see if they are there. And the way that you do that, you go up to the top of the page. So let me come up a little bit, go to search, and then go to the card catalog. Then limit your search by South Carolina and maybe the word arrest. All right. So to scroll back down, the most consistent address that my great grandparents lived at was 2605 Magnolia. And we find them there on the 1920 census. And they're documented there from at least 1920 until 1923. And we could even safely say 1929 or so, right? Because we know that by the time they get to Chicago, they're there in 1930. So when we find them in New Orleans in 1930, or 20 rather, in the household is James Benjamin Sewell, who's my great grandfather, Teresa, my great grandmother with the wonderful hat, along with someone noted as a sister, Nettie. Wait a minute. Use the chat. Did I just tell a story about a sister and the fact that the folks got to fighting and the sister left and that was it? Didn't I just tell you a story about a sister? Uh-huh. We did. Now, note it says that Nettie is a sister to the head of household, who is James. But James don't have no sister named Nettie. James only had one sister named Nora, which is why Aunt Nora is named Aunt Nora. There you go. Look at crumbs left behind, because sometimes when we're looking at these censuses, we're like, oh, let's hurry up and build our tree back as far as fast as possible. But we're leaving behind crumbs because, again, we've got 2405 Magnolia is the address. Great grandparents there. They're renting. We have a sister in the household who I think is definitely Teresa's, not James's. And we know that these are the right people because Nora is there. That's my aunt. James Jr., that's Uncle Jimmy. Oswald is my grandfather, which some of you all are like, wait a minute, hold up. He died Jack Oscar Sewell, but he was born Oswald. He had 6 aliases. That's a whole other session. August, which was Uncle Augustus. And then there's another daughter in the household named Dorothy Baker. Who is this? So we can go safely with the assumption that Nettie Bostic is actually probably the sister of Teresa. So in addition to leaving the address on the table as a resource, as a search resource, you can also pick up things like whether the person attended school, whether they were literate. Looks like everyone in the household was, except for my grandfather. Probably because he was 5. Now, he did end up learning how to read and write later, and I'm laughing because he would probably be so mad at me for laughing at him about that. But he was an interesting guy. Again, 6 aliases. And we know we have the right person because it says my great grandfather was an iron worker. And that's something that is a machinist, an iron worker, a carpenter, all that kind of stuff. For him, he vacillated between jobs like that. All right. So Nettie is working in a factory. Okay. So one of the tricks that you can do, especially if you're having trouble trying to find people, and I brought this up several times before, is you can go to the newspaper and instead of searching for them by name, you can search for them by address. Now, notice how I'm searching for this. I'm using quotation marks, which means that it is going to look for that exact phrase. Good question. Could Dorothy be Nettie's daughter? Exactly. Because if they jacked up the relationship to Nettie to James, they likely jacked up the relationship of Dorothy to James as well. Very possible. I believe you are right. So you put in the street address and let's limit it to New Orleans, Louisiana. That's the location. Okay? And we know they lived there between 1920 and we'll put 1929. Now notice we aren't searching for people. We're searching for an address. And in April of 1920, it looks like an ad was placed in the newspaper. And what does it say? Now let's go up to the top. What are these? Looks like an ad. Situations wanted, females. So someone said, are you trying to find if the house was sold? No. I'm just seeing how my family was interacting with their community. I know that by April of 1920, let's go back to the census. I'm sorry, January of 1920, my great grandmother was at home, right? She did not have a job. But this newspaper ad in April of 1920 says that a woman who was plain cooking or housework, she seeks that. This could very well be my great grandmother. April 25th, another situation wanted ad is placed for women. And it says two colored sisters, housework or nursing. Did we search for a name? Nope. Did we find this on the front page of the newspaper? Nope. What information do we have? Go back to your timeline. This is why this is important. We know, and we have documented through the US Census and literal city directories from 1920 to at least 1923 that my ancestors, my great grandparents, lived at 2405 Magnolia in New Orleans. That is what we know. And if we go to the dates of these newspaper ads, April 25th and April 18th, one for a woman who wants to cook and do housework, and another one for two sisters who want to do housework and nursing. This ain't even the best part. Okay? Good comment. I found thousands of items in newspapers and never thought to search by address. Back in the olden days when people weren't afraid to put their address in the newspaper. Right. Right. So let's keep going because again, there's all these ads. Here's one in 1921. We know that they're there in 1921, correct? Just in case you all need to see the records, we're going to go to this 1921 US City Directory. Now, I want you all to realize that this branch of my family, my great grandparents never owned a home. They always rented. Always. Even when they got to Chicago. James Sewell Carpenter, house 2405 Magnolia, 1921, New Orleans City Directory. So if we go to the September ad, by colored man and wife, cooking and housework, chauffeur and yardman stay on premises or leave city. Great question. I wonder who owned the house. Great question. But note, I'm getting context, right? Someone could potentially argue, how do you know that this is them? I know that a colored man and his wife were living at 2405 Magnolia, and I know one that lived there during this time was my great grandparents. Could there have been a second family there in between the census? Absolutely. But circumstantially, we got two colored sisters looking for housework. And on the 1920 census that took place 3 months before this, two colored sisters were living at 2405 Magnolia. Now, let's go go to the census before this, okay? Because Teresa, my great grandmother, she was on 1910 twice. How many of you have had ancestors that have been enumerated on the census more than once and not, 1910, 1920, 1930? No, no, no. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about being enumerated twice in the same year. I have several of these. And then sometimes you're like, wait a minute, if they counted people twice during that year, why couldn't they count my one person once during the year I needed? I've often asked that myself. So, based on what we know, based on this New Orleans marriage record, Teresa Holmes marries James Sewell on April 6, 1910. Now, why is that important? Why is them being married on April 6, 1910 important? Let's see if your thinking caps are on. We've got Teresa on the census twice in 1910. They get married April 6th of 1910. Why does that matter? Why does that date matter? One person has answered this correctly in the chat. Come on, y'all. You're so good at smart. Yes, I see another one yep, that's technically right. Pay attention to the census day. Generally speaking, now, April 1st is the date when you're looking at 1950, 1940, right? That is generally what we're talking about. Yes, before and after the census. Correct. So, if the census day in 1910 is April 1st and they got married on April 6th, this might be why I found her on the census twice. So, if we use the fact that there's a sister named Nettie, okay, we do know that there's a sister named Nettie, right? We have that. We're making an assumption that that's the case. When I go to the 1910, the first one that I find is April, could be 15th or 18th, one of the two. So this information is as of 15th, either the 15th looks like the 15th of April, 1910. And if we scroll down, we find a Teresa Holmes living at 707 Rampart in New Orleans. And she's in a household with other roomers. Almeda Holmes, Henrietta Holmes, John Holmes, James Holmes, Annie Holmes, and Rosetta Holmes. And look how James and Annie, or I think that's Annie. This should tell you how old I'm getting with my eyes. That might be Robert because it's listed as male. What I do know is that John was married to Rosetta, and these are their two children. It's Annie. Should be that. And my hypothesis is that Almeda is the older sister of Henrietta and Teresa. Will this way of searching show women's maiden names? Potentially, right. Now, again, what's giving me her maiden name is this marriage record along with other stuff, right? So let's say you're like, well, I don't know what her maiden name is. You can use records like Social Security applications and claims where their children have listed them as their parent, right? And generally speaking, you will have the mother's maiden name on that record. The other thing I also want to point out too is depending on like the type of frame of mind that the person had when they were filling out the Social Security application, sometimes I've seen where instead of listing the mother's maiden name, they list the name of the mother at that time, which meant that if, let's say, the father had died and the mother had gotten remarried, they listed the mother's married name at that time. So again, you got to kind of corral that, right? Someone said the census takers need to write neither. I know, I wish, but they had a time in the land, okay? So again, I'm just making an assumption. Here's a Teresa Holmes, right? She's at 707 Rampart. Note again, there are breadcrumbs on this census. Within this household is a woman named Margaret Brown, who is 30 years of age and she's widowed. She's got an adopted child named Vincent or Vernon, who is a month old. Who gave Margaret their baby? That's a whole other scenario. My. Then we've got within that household Almeda, Henrietta, Teresa, and then John and Rosetta, his wife, and their two children, James and Annie. Then there's another set of people, Martha Todd, George Howard, Thomas Sims, and Lula Sims. It's a lot of people. It's almost like a tenement. And Teresa is not in, she's not in school. She's not working. She's just existing in this space. Okay. So I believe that this is my great grandmother, but remember she's enumerated twice. And so here we are on the 18th and 19th of April of 1910. And if we scroll down here, we see Nettie Holmes, Almeda Holmes, her sister, and then James and Teresa in the same household. Where do you get Social Security applications? You can get the claims index on Ancestry. So let me bounce back to Honey's. So he's in the claims index. And then I also sent off to the Social Security Administration for the actual application. So I'll show you both so you can see what the SS5 looks like. And I uploaded these to my gallery for him. So this is available on his tree. Okay, so when you go through the applications index, this is the information you can get. Okay, you've got James B. Sewell, July 21st, 1887 is his birthday, born in Louisiana, dies November 3rd, 1951. Definitely know that this is him because that's true. There was a claim placed on December 3rd. And then as of July 22nd, 1977 is listed as James B. Sewell. You're like, well, wait a minute. Why are these notes there? Why is his name changed or listed that way? Well, you got to remember my great grandmother, she outlived him by 30 years. So she had claimed for his Social Security. So you take this information, including the number, and you order what is called the SS5. And this is which the number matches what is available here. And it includes the name of the person along with where they're living, which my family did live on Michigan. They lived at 4902 South Michigan. In Chicago, my great-grandfather worked for Metropolitan Funerals Parlor, which is still in existence today through another name iteration. Birth date matches, the names of his parents match. And his name is signed. And this is of 1936. Right. Great question or great comment. If people were traveling, they were often enumerated twice, once at their usual residence by whoever answered the door, and the second time at the place where they were visiting. Right. And I think that's definitely the case because I think Aunt Nettie lived by herself and Almeda came over probably because James and Teresa or Honey and Nanny had shacked up over there because this was within 10 days of them getting married. So note how it says Almeda is the sister of Nettie. And if we go back to this census, we're getting rumor. It's establishing a relationship, right? And there's a random man named William Karamis in the household. I don't know who this man is, but he's there. Okay. So we're cooking with fish grease here in terms of siblings, right? Like this looks pretty circumstantial. But what happens when we put the address in and search for it, you all? What happens? So let's go back to newspapers.com because there's several other things here. There's several ads placed, you all, for a mechanic and a chauffeur, all kinds of stuff. We limited it to that. So let's put in 216 Drides. And we'll take off the date. And again, we're in a major metro area. There's all sorts of stuff that's being reported on 216 Drides. Several things. Okay. Let's see, how many results was that? It's 130 matches. So there's quite a bit to just sift through here. There's a lot of news reporting and stories that took place. Here's one for a woman that died there and was found sick. Somebody was destitute. Another thing of major metropolitan cities is that they will report out on deaths in the newspaper as a record of the health department. So sometimes you will find this or even burial records in the newspaper. So for instance, this is in 1879. Marriages, births, and deaths were recorded by the Office of or Board of Health. You got all these births, you got marriages, and then you've got deaths where they're actually listing where the people were living. So this says a 1 month old baby died at, looks like 215 Dryde Street in 1879. So this is earlier than most people would imagine when it comes to actual vital records. But again, we're talking about a major metro area. All right. So there's a lot of stuff here, but I want to limit this to 1920. Whoops. That didn't get to where I needed it to. Someone said, I can't wait to search. Okay, where is my record at? Ah, here it is. Okay. This is what I wanted to show you. And we're going to read this together. Shall we? Hammond, Louisiana. Now, Hammond is in Tangipahoa Parish. Based on my DNA matches I've connected back to my great grandmother, her family came from Hammond or Tangipahoa Parish, which is Tangipahoa or St. Helena. St. Helena is the parish that Tangipahoa was carved out of. And when I searched for 2016 Dryads, a newspaper article came out in February of 1910. My family was documented at that address in April of 1910. Body of Negro servant in Hennon family buried. February 26, Andrew Jackson Murray, one of the oldest colored men of this parish, who had resided at Mount Hennon for more than 80 years, died at the home of his granddaughter, Margaret Brown, 216 Dryde Street, New Orleans, February 22nd. Go back to the census. Who is living in the same household as Almeda and Teresa and John and Rosetta? A woman named Margaret Brown. They're at 707 Rampart by the time we get to April. But another woman named Margaret Brown is living at 216 Drydes in February of 1910. Who is living at 216 Drydes in 1910? Almeda and Nettie and James and Teresa. Could this have been a different Margaret Brown? I'm waiting. Could it? I would love your feedback. Could it have been a different Margaret Brown? Because this is within 2 months of each other. And here's the thing. What if we don't have anything else? Because sometimes you don't have nothing else, y'all. Remember, I told you, I don't have anybody I can call. I don't have a family Bible. I don't have a litany of family papers. All I have is what my research and what the DNA provides. And based on what the evidence is showing us, Nanny and Honey get married April 6th of 1910. Nanny's on the census twice. At one point, she's with Honey and her two sisters. And before that, or around the same time, she is in the same household with her family and a woman named Margaret Brown. You are telling me, again, that it potentially could not be the same Margaret Brown who was in this newspaper article mentioning as taking care of her grandfather. Do the ages of the others match? Yes. Roughly they do. Right. If she's a widow, Brown wouldn't be her maiden name. Correct. So then the question is, first of all, how do we resolve this? Because a Margaret Brown at 216 Drydes in February of 1910, who has the exact same name as the same woman who was living in the household with my family at 216 Drydes and at 707 Rampart, is caring for the oldest colored person in Tangipahoa Parish. We have to qualify this because the report comes out of Hammond, which is in Tangipahoa, but they're telling us in the newspaper in New Orleans that this man died at his granddaughter's house in New Orleans on February 22nd. I love the debate in the chat. I want this to keep going after this session is over. Caring for, but not living there. Neighbor answer the, come on, y'all, use your brains. Yes, you're perfect. You can do this. You know this. Let's keep going. During his last sickness, Andrew Murray was kindly cared for by Mrs. John A. Morris and her two sons, A.H. and D.H. Morris. Mrs. Morris had the remains brought to Hammond and buried at Mount Hinnon, his old home. Andrew Jackson Murray was born in Nashville, Tennessee, February 13th, 1817, and was brought to Mount Hinnon in 1828. Since that time, he had been a faithful servant in the Hinnon family. Y'all, there are certain words being used in this write-up that are telling you that Andrew Murray was enslaved by the Morrises. What are the words? Faithful servant. He's born in 1817, brought to Mount Hinnon in 1820, meaning he was not taken on his own accord. He was brought there. His name is Andrew Jackson. Could he have been named after Andrew Jackson? Absolutely, because he was born in Nashville. You all are smart. Right. Research the Morris family. Benevolent worker. First colored school teacher in Tangipahoa Parish. He served as an assessor of the parish and justice of the peace. Leaves his wife and 8 sons and 1 daughter. Code words. This is essentially an obituary from a former slave. Now, why does this matter? Well, we have Nanny, 1950. I don't believe she's not in 1940, 1930, 1920, 2 in 1910. Where in the world is she living in 1900? I tried. Right. Where's his wife? We're going to get to that. Tried to find Nanny in 1900. Looked in New Orleans, looked all over, could not find her. And then I said, you know what? Let me just try something else, right? And what I came across for her was a potential record in 1900, and it was in New Orleans. And the reason why I want to show you all this is because when I tell you this record has chafed my soul for years. Why? I want to call out, and y'all, I don't use annotation on these at all, but there is something that is missing right here on this census page. And unless you are adept at reading census records, you might miss what is missing on this page. And let me erase my wonderful drawings so that you can understand my frustration. So I get to this census. It's in the 10th ward. There's a John Holmes, a T. Holmes, and a Nettie Holmes. Thank you. Where the gender and the races is folded. So we're not even going to fuss about handwriting here. We don't get a race and a gender for anybody on this page. Yes, some of you are in your houses, cars, at work, whatever. You are shaking your fists like, are you freaking kidding me? Yes, I am kidding you. So I'm like, I have nothing. How do I know that this is her? I'm just going to save it to her because I don't know. How many of you have done this where you save things because you're not sure? Usually what Nicka does is when I'm not sure, I come over to this middle area and I add a web link and I will put in potential. So then that way I can get back to this thing. If I'm not entirely sure it's her, and I'll take the link out of the URL and I'll put it up here and I'll put 1900 census. Why? Because then this way I'm making sure that if someone is copying my tree and they're thinking that everything I have is 110% sound, they're not going to make the same mistake as me. It's saved there as potential. And then if I ever need to come back to it, it's right there. Use your web links. So we've got who could potentially be, because the John and the Nettie, they're really saying, yeah, this is probably her. T is probably Teresa. But they're borders for an Alfred and a Lizzie Lewis with a Mary and an Edward and a Julia and an Olivia as children. Everybody is born in Louisiana. That's it. But we can't make an assumption that it is New Orleans. Right. Do the census before and after on location. However, 1900 you don't have 1890. Not quite sure what you mean. How do you feel about someone copying your tree? I don't care. If you're doing research and you need the help, hey, right. Some people use a shoebox. I put potential and I leave it in web links, and then that way I can always go back to it. So for a long time, I was just like, listen, since whoever did this microfilming folded that page up and has made my life insufferable trying to figure out if this is this woman, I'm going to stand on business and I'm going to think that T Holmes is, and not even Holmes, we got T Holmes, okay? I'm going to stand on business that this is her. But I have to disprove my theory. I can't wait for you all to see this. Okay. So, what if I told you that it is them? And how do I know? Because Alfred Lewis has a wife named Elizabeth. And I traced through the descendants of those children, and there's a Lewis. There's several Lewis descendants. And Margaret Lewis is their daughter. Who is Margaret? She's the person in the household in 1910. It's the same people. Just in case you don't believe me, let's go to 1930. Same exact city. We're in a household. Edward Lewis is the head of household. His brother-in-law, John Baptiste Polite, along with his sister Lily and his sister Margaret Brown, are in the same household. If we go back to the 1910 census, or I'm sorry, the 1900 census, let me find it. Alfred Lewis and Lizzie are the parents of Edward Lewis. Who was in the household? John, Teresa, and Nettie. I need you all to know that I found this 2 hours ago. So now, what do we do with this information? What do we do? Because we have a whole formerly enslaved man with his history in this obituary that we only found because we searched for the address. We know who his slaveholders are. Did I get to this? Did I get to confirming that these children in 1900 were mine because I searched through the newspaper for them in New Orleans? No, I didn't. How did I start here? Number one, started with what I knew, which was not very much. I knew her name. I knew where she got married to my great grandfather. I found them on the census, right? Didn't have any names for any of her siblings till I got to 1920, where it listed a sister to my great grandfather. That was not actually his sister, it was her sister. And then when I looked for them in 1910, it was around when they got married. And she was enumerated twice. Once in a household with a woman named Margaret Brown with siblings, and then again separately with her sisters and her new husband. When I took the address that they were living in 1910 and I searched for it, I found the obituary for a formerly enslaved man that mentioned the name of his granddaughter, who just so happened to be the same person that my family was living with in 1910. And when I traced her tree out, I discovered that her grandparents were the same people that my great grandmother and her siblings were living with in 1900 on a census where the page had the race and the gender entirely folded. That's how we got to it. Now, do you all think I have the easiest tree in America now? Do you? Do you think I don't have brick walls? Do you think I don't have to do around the tree 700 times in order to get to stuff? No. But what I am sharing with you in this session is that sometimes you have to take an orthodox means by which to get to the information. And now what I have is a very compelling and powerful story of likely a group of descendants of enslaved people from the same slaveholders migrating from Tangipahoa Parish down to New Orleans together, living together. And thankfully, because they lived together in the early 20th century, I have a fighting chance at being able to trace my own family as enslaved people. And it did not come because I typed the name in right and I spelled it the same way. And I was very restrictive on birth dates and all of that. We're not talking about ranges of birth years. Did I not talk about that? I talked about transient people. I talked about my family living in different locations, but the fact that I could corral them into a certain spot for a number of years. What do we find? We found newspaper classified ads where it appeared my grandfather and my great grandfather, my great grandmother were putting out ads for them to apply for work. Wasn't wrapped up in a bow. And sometimes it's like that. You've heard me sit with you for sessions where I just follow the hints. But for this line, absolutely not. Nanny hazes me any opportunity she can give me. I'm still being hazed because I still don't know how Andrew Jackson Murray connects. So now I got to go down that rabbit hole. But at least I have something. And I'm really sharing this with you all to be inspiring so that when you don't have a lot, you realize that you still do have a lot to work with. And y'all, again, she hazes me. She loves hazing me. That's why her photo stays up here like it does. Questions, questions. If you don't know their parents' name, do you add them as enslaved or the slave older name? It all depends, right? Remember, use that potential, like how I had for potential records. Use those web links if you're not sure. Use it. She does haze me in a fancy hat. That is hilarious and so very accurate. So very accurate. Um, so where do I go from here? Look into the Hennons, right? Because I'm like, well, maybe it was a different. No, there's a road called Mount Hennon in Tangipahoa Parish, and it's researching how do the Lewises. Because if you go back to the article, it talks about Mrs. John Morris, rather, who came and got Andrew from New Orleans and brought his body back to Hammond. She brought him back. So how is John A. Morris's wife and her two sons, A.H. and D.H. Morris, how are they connected back to this Mount Hennon? How are they? Because they're alive in 1910. Could Mrs. John Morris be the former slave mistress? And considering age, could her father or her mother's family have enslaved Andrew and also mine at the same time? Maybe, maybe. Or it could be that my family was just in community with these people. And this before me finding the DNA that connected me back to Tangipahoa Parish, this is already doing it. This is doing it on paper. Okay. Yes, please look through those breadcrumbs, you all. Please. Because we're leaving so much on the table and by virtue of us just speeding through to get the tree back as far as possible. And I'm telling y'all, I squeezed every bit of lemon juice out of this lemon that she's hazing me in a fancy hat in. This opens the door to a lot of questions. Again, here's the thing. We have a lot of sessions that we have left to do this year. And hopefully by the time we get to Juneteenth, maybe I'll have an answer for this. Or maybe before. You'll have to let me know. All right, let me see if there are any questions here on this. Hopefully you all were able to follow because it was a lot to process. Because technically this is unorthodox. Someone asked how long did I dance? I don't really fully think I didn't even fully process because I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to talk about today. I don't think I fully danced. She won't let me. Not until I really fully get back. Full transparency, you all. I discovered through trying to research her family, from a genetic sense, that I'm related to people I grew up with in California. We all descend from her grandfather. Her mother was the older child, and my really good friends were. They came from the younger sister. Had no idea, no clue. So people are always close, always close. How do you account for relatives on both sides? Well, you choose one line to focus on. And when you hit brick walls like this, I've had to leave this behind. I still have a whole thing. Y'all don't even realize. I take notes too. I try to draw out trees. There's a whole connection on this side back to a man named Jeremiah Davis in Emmett County, Mississippi, that I'm trying to rectify. That also comes through her. So sometimes you got to leave it. Sometimes you got to come back to it. But focus on one line at a time. Oh, look at this. And I'll leave with this comment. I was a little bothered by the fact that we were wrapping up Black History Month, but this was perfect because it opened us up to 365 days ahead. Sure does. So, what are you going to take from today? Searching by address in the newspaper or mining through your records to pull out and extract those things that could help you move forward? Or perhaps it's looking for records of the people are not necessarily directly named, but you're pretty sure that those are your folks. I give you permission to chase your rabbit holes this week and come back next time with what you find. Have a great day, you all, and happy Black History Month.